Horn of Africa relief operation is gaining momentum and South Africa has joined in. Pretoria has pledged 1 million rand for famine-hit Somalia and it's appealing to the public and private sectors to support relief efforts. Aid organization Gift of the Givers is also preparing to head into the country. More than 10 million people are affected and need emergency help, including 2.85 million in Somalia. A drought in the Horn of Africa has precipitated the famine.
A growing humanitarian crisis. Human life hangs in the balance in Somalia. Aid agencies are finally stepping up their efforts. Food and nutritious supplements are what's most needed. Children are malnourished and in need of special care. The UN estimates 720,000 children could die. But Islamist rebels in Somalia, known as Al-Shabaab, again threaten relief efforts. They've warned aid organizations will not be allowed in parts of Somalia. But that won't deter South African aid organization Gift of the Givers' plan for a 10 million rand mission. This is the nerve center of their preparations. Staff and volunteers at its Johannesburg warehouse have been busy for more than a week. They're packaging donations collected from major companies and ordinary South Africans.
All the basic meal, sugar, tea bags, all the stuff that people need on a daily basis.
We're preparing for the last week already now, receiving stuff coming in from outside and donations, and then repacking it in these boxes.
It's also deploying medical teams to help treat the sick.
We're taking specialist pediatricians or they can handle a specialized feeding, especially for infants. Then this time is something new. We're taking dietitians, which we've never done before. And we look at some general doctors who can work a casualty and who have general pediatric and general practice experience, so they can do a range of conditions.
Government has also pledged to assist relief efforts and sounded a call for donations. Pretoria has set aside 1 million rand.
We do believe that over the next 4 weeks we must mobilize enough effort and enough finances to send to the alleviation of the dire situation in Somalia.
The SABC is partnering government's efforts and details of the relief collections will be announced soon. Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu has also appealed to South Africans to assist. Valdi Karlse, SABC News.
The African Union has delayed its emergency summit on the crisis in the Horn of Africa. It has wanted African leaders to meet next Tuesday to discuss how they can help save millions from starvation. But the AU says the leaders need more notice and has postponed the summit for 2 weeks. South Africa has a relief mission in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Valdi Karlse and Herbert Memela filed this report.
Shamsa Ibrahim is among more than 100,000 who fled to this city in recent weeks. The 6-year-old walked more than 400 kilometers barefoot to get here. She says all the time she was being hunted by insurgents who insist there is no famine.
Al-Shabaab said we shouldn't leave, but we walked at night and left my brothers behind, and they died.
If you see another one, call me, please.
This team from Gift of the Givers has already treated hundreds like Shamsa in the past 2 days. There are many thousands more that need their help. They built this makeshift hospital themselves. They need armed guards to protect them from the insurgents. And even as the team is working, many more patients arrive to escape a cholera outbreak at a nearby main hospital. They've saved dozens of children so far, but they cannot save them all. Abdullah Borio is the first child they've lost at this clinic. He was this woman's last grandchild.
Yeah, we lost a child just now that came in extremely, he was 7.5% dehydrated, and we had him on IV for several hours. He was sitting here with his grandmom, but I guess we're not going to win everyone.
But their care for the boy's family does not end there. They help take Abdullah to be buried. A hard blow, but these medics don't have time to grieve.
Karalsa, SABC News, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Somali government forces backed by AU troops today moved cautiously into famine-struck areas of Mogadishu, abandoned by Al-Shabaab's rebels yesterday. Hundreds seeking aid continue to stream into the war-torn city daily. The medical team of South Africa's relief mission Gift of the Givers lent assistance at a camp in the Wabere district, home to around 9,000 people. Voldy Karlse and Herbert Mamela filed this report.
Just like at the previous camp, the people here are desperate for some food and medical attention. When Gift of the Givers arrived this morning, the crowd surged forward, and the guards accompanying them had to fire shots into the air to get them under control. The Muhammad Mary School is newly renovated. The school children are on school holiday now, but this setup has meant that the doctors can get through the patients faster. Classrooms have been converted into individual consulting rooms. Critically ill babies were attended to first, but medics say it's not just hunger that's killing these children. They've seen a number of infectious diseases like measles and polio that should have been eradicated years ago. Outside the gates are dozens of markers indicating the graves of people for whom relief has come too late. Among them, 40 babies who died this week alone. But Gift of the Givers has already helped thousands in the past week, and they're hoping to help many more before they finally fly out. While their efforts to help people continues, AU forces are still fighting insurgents outside the city, and overnight they used some heavy artillery. Voldy Karalsa, SABC News, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Despite a global response to the famine in the Horn of Africa, the figures remain staggering. More than 12 million people are affected by the worst drought in 60 years. Let's take a closer look at the situation in Somalia. 3.5 million Somalis face starvation. Since May, thousands of children under the age of 5 have died. Hundreds of thousands are malnourished, raising fears of a much higher toll. 5% of the population is now assembled in 23 camps in Mogadishu. Almost the same number have fled to neighboring Kenya and Ethiopia. Vast numbers can't be reached as Al-Shabaab fighters block access. Gift of the Givers has thanked South Africans for their overwhelming response to the plight of Somalis.
A show of Ubuntu, tins of fish, rice, water and mealie meal, just some of the items donated. Already 12 tons of water and 35 tons of food have been sent to the stricken nation.
We're expecting a ship to leave also with 1,000 tons of goods, but we're also waiting on the South African Defence Force to assist us in the situation to send goods over. People from all over is bringing stuff. This initiative is also somehow uniting people in a sense and giving people a sense of responsibility and helpfulness.
The Gift of the Givers has had to keep their doors open for 24 hours a day to receive donations. With more than half of Somalia's population facing starvation, South Africans have been moved to donate generously. And these supplies will go a long way to lessen the burden. And the International Marketing Council, through its Play Your Part campaign, has also come on board. It says South Africans have opened their hearts despite their own problems.
If we as South Africa want to prosper, we cannot live in the middle of indignity and poverty and people who are wanting, because ultimately it will impact on our own prosperity. So what I would answer is that our own prosperity is integrally linked to the prosperity of our neighbors and the rest of the other countries on the continent.
And close to 8 tons of rice will be flown to Somalia tonight. Crisalda Lewis, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The South Africa relief mission in Mogadishu is wrapping up tonight after its final day in the city. The Gift of the Givers team has treated thousands in the past week. Today, hundreds of people stormed their camp in a desperate final bid for help.
How far would a mother go to save her child? These women were prepared to face down weapons pointed at them, and when they saw their chance, perhaps their last chance for help, they took it. There have been similar scenes at other aid camps in the city. Just last week, 7 people were killed when a camp was looted. Incredibly, here there were few injuries. And the South African team can't blame these people for trying. They've treated thousands in the city this past week, but there are 400,000 refugees in Mogadishu. Dozens are dying every day, many at this camp.
Doctors say if they've helped just one baby, then their mission's been a success. The reality is they've probably pulled back thousands from the brink of starvation.
The team will fly back to South Africa tomorrow, and they'll return as very different people.
The people of Somalia are beautiful people. And they live with they're such humble people, such humility. Life is so simple for them.
I've learned the resilience of man. I've learned what it means to carry yourself with dignity despite not having anything.
Patience and tolerance was one of the virtues on this trip.
The supplies donated by the South African public will continue to be distributed here, and Gift of the Givers plan to come back next month to see what more they can do. Valdi Karlse, SABC News, Mogadishu, Somalia.
In their mission to famine-stricken Somalia, the Gift of the Givers humanitarian group has arrived back in South Africa. Deputy International Affairs Minister Marius Fransman was on hand to welcome them back. An SABC News crew was with them for the entire mission, sharing their experience of the famine and strife-torn Somalia. Doctors forming part of the Gift of the Givers organization provided much-needed medical attention. They want the South African government to step in and do more to help Somalis. So far, government has raised 8 million rand towards famine relief in that country. Joining us now in the studio to share experience is our ace reporter, Valdi Karlse. Valdi, you did a super job the last week in Somalia.
Thanks very much, Eben.
But tell me, was that the toughest job you've ever done?
Most definitely, without a doubt. I went to Japan earlier this year, and the scale of the suffering of the Somali people is just more than you can imagine, and I think more than I was prepared for, and more than any of I or my colleagues had ever seen.
And emotionally now, how do you sort of decode yourself after that kind of experience? How do you feel?
You know, we were driving to the airport today, and this father came down one of the main streets in Mogadishu, and he was carrying a mat in his hand, and in it was his baby daughter, and the baby had a rigor mortis had already set in, and he was accompanied with 4 friends, but around him, children were playing normally, women were washing their clothes, people who could go to the shops were shopping. It's just such a surreal experience. And I sat on the tarmac, looked out on this beautiful coast, and looked back at the devastated buildings, at the camps, and you just think, it's just such a contrast, and the tears just flowed. I cried for the suffering of the Somali people. I think the whole week I've managed to be really tough and didn't have an emotional moment and faced down bullets and saw women getting beat up. But just today, seeing that dad walking down the street with his little daughter in his arms on his way to bury her, and all he could give her in the way of a dignified burial was to put her in the ground and put a stick there, and that's it.
That must be very hard. Now, you spoke about the bullets. What was that like, and how did you and Herbert, your cameraman, how did you guys deal with that on the day and then the days after that?
Gift of the Givers made sure that we had a security team with us the whole time. They were really concerned about our safety and their safety, and they made sure that everywhere we went, we were accompanied by soldiers. But they obviously can't protect you all the time. And when it's something like sniper fire, it doesn't matter how many soldiers surround you. The bullet's going to find you if he hits his mark properly. That day, I was actually walking towards Herbert, and he was standing in an open field, and some of the refugees were sitting down. I saw him hit the ground. I saw him duck. I heard the sound, and I saw him get back up again. When he got back up, I almost wet my pants. I was so relieved because I'd realized that he was then okay. We had several of those type of moments because It is a war zone. People are fighting all the time. When we arrived in Mogadishu, the mayor said to me, you know, there are more guns in Somalia than cell phones. And it's true. Every single person carries a gun. But like I said, Gift of the Givers made sure that their security team took very, very good care of us.
Now, what are some of the other stories that will stay with you after the week that you've spent there?
Well, it's 9-month-old Ines who comes to mind immediately when you ask that question, Ibn. She was the very first patient that Gift of the Givers treated. And in fact, they were busy setting up the makeshift hospital, still putting up the tents. And her dad came to me, he had her in his arms. Doesn't speak a word of English. He just handed the baby to me. And I'm like, whoa, there's a baby? And the baby is weak. She couldn't open her eyes. She couldn't lift her head. He just handed her to me, and I just said, can someone please help him, help him? And she was the very first one they treated. They put her on a drip for 3 days, and then they transferred her to hospital. And it's just stories like those that made you realize that even though it was such a small medical team, they made such an incredible difference. But of course, they also suffered some losses. I mean, little Abdullah was the first child that died in the clinic, if you watch the reports. Yeah. And it hit them really hard, but it hit us really hard too, because you were there, you were talking to those mothers, you were talking to those fathers, you were hearing their stories, how they walk for days, how all they have when they get to Mogadishu is a 2-foot tent that's covered with just scarves and made out of branches. That's all.
Well, Valdi, I'm sure it was a very difficult experience, but you've done a super job for us in Mogadishu. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Evan.
The South African humanitarian organization Gift of the Givers plans to return to Somalia once they've reloaded supplies. They arrived home yesterday after a grueling 10-day mission to the famine-stricken country. The Deputy Minister of International Relations, Marius Fransman, congratulated the group on a sterling job. He said 8 million rand had been raised by government for the famine program. The Deputy Minister said government would donate 4 million to the Gift of the Givers to cover fuel, transportation and costs of medical supplies. A team of 20 medical personnel, 12 reporters, including the SABC's Valdi Karelse and cameraman Herbert Memela, spent 8 days in the East African country. Now, as I said earlier on, Valdi and Herbert Memela will join us this morning, and they'll talk to us about the situation.
18 tons of food, water and medical supplies are to be flown to famine-ravaged Somalia. The aid from Gift of the Givers has been placed aboard an Air Force plane. Another Mercy flight. 500 tons of aid have already been dispatched. Tomorrow, another 18 tons of urgently needed supplies. An estimated 11 million people are starving in southern Somalia. The Defense Force has offered to fast-track the process, ending a logistical nightmare. More flights are scheduled for the capital, Mogadishu. The public has been urged to help relief efforts.
Thank you very much for the Defense Force for helping us, Gift of the Givers, for also being
African disaster relief organization Gift of the Givers heads back to Somalia tonight to provide much-needed aid. Famine has now been declared in 6 Somali regions.
A famine-stricken nation. Already, tens of thousands have perished. Millions more are starving. The need for supplies is urgent. Gift of the Givers is taking 39 tons of food and medical supplies.
We've got the biggest hospital in Mogadishu called Benadir Hospital. And the focus of this campaign is that hospital where thousands of people are coming and require medical attention. And that's where we're going to save many lives.
An SABC crew is returning with the aid mission.
Every mission, every humanitarian worker will tell you is different for both the journalists and those going to help.
Physically, I'm ready to tell the story. But emotionally, I don't think anyone could ever be ready for that disaster.
For families, time to say goodbye. The crew will spend 10 days in the country. Angoba Mkulu, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The humanitarian organization Gift of the Givers has sent another South African team to famine-hit Somalia. The 29-member medical doctors team includes surgeons, pharmacists, gynecologists and nutritionists.
For some in this team, it's the second mission to Mogadishu in little more than a month. There are more of them this time, 29 medics, including surgeons. But the need is great too. Even as they flew in,
Somalia's Prime Minister, ABDUL Mohammed Ali Gas, was heading out to neighboring Kenya to seek more help. Just this week, the United Nations declared the famine had spread to a sixth region of Somalia and that more than 750,000 people here could starve to death, half of them children. The South African team will join an international aid effort here. Their work this time at Mogadishu's biggest hospital, Benedin. They'll be here for 10 days. Hundreds of people come here every day, hoping for help.
Nowadays it's more and more and more, and it is more overcrowded. The hospital is so overcrowded.
For the time being, we have 290 occupied with 290, and we have nearly 100 admissions a day.
Is it a lot to handle?
It's too much. So we are working 24 hours a day. We are living here in the hospital. We don't live in a hotel. We're living here in the hospital, and our doctor's here 24/7.
Mothers who've just given birth, while others sit and wait with their dehydrated children. The facilities are few, the conditions dreadful. But these medics have already shown that they can work in the most overwhelming conditions. Voldi Karolsa, SABC News, Mogadishu, Somalia.
South African medics in Mogadishu are treating hundreds of children in a renovated Mogadishu hospital. Some of the team are starting to show the strain. Voldi Karolsa and Herbert Memela are with the gift of the givers. They filed this report.
Faria's 4 months old, one of the many born during this crisis, now one of the many that has died because of it. Around 250 children are lost to the famine in this city every day. For her mother, Faria's death was meant to be.
It's okay, yeah, because it has been brought by God, and God has taken it back again.
For paramedic Sipho Konde, though, it was the moment when working here finally hurt. The 38-year-old from Klerksdorp has been a paramedic for 15 years. It's his first time in Mogadishu. He's part of a 29-strong team that's dealt with life or death almost every hour. But Konde is also a father of 2.
After the baby just crashed, or after he died, I actually looked at the father, and then as a father myself, I put myself on his shoes. Very difficult.
If the South African team can make a difference in coming days, it's here that they'll do it. A hospital in a suburb just recently taken back from Al-Shabaab. The need, as ever, is immense. But there's help to be had here. 24-hour care, medicine and food, even an operating theatre. It's the sort of care that babies like Faria deserve. Sipho Konde couldn't save her, but he knows he can save others. Voldi Karolsa, SABC News, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Welcome back. You're watching the news at 7. The team of South African doctors and aid group Gift of the Givers, helping thousands of famine and disease-struck Somalis, are due back home tonight. This report from Voldi Karolsa and Herbert Memela.
A plea for help, and this South African team has been answering the call. They've treated more than 5,000 people, carried out surgery on more than 100, offered hope to a people who feared they'd been forgotten. Mogadishu is filled with more than 450,000 people who fled Somalia's famine, and for many, the only help to be had was from these South Africans. They're heading home now with mixed feelings.
A mom who brought in a very dehydrated baby, and the baby demised despite all that we tried. And the mom came back the next day because she said she wants to help.
The high point is to see the appreciation, the hope if they get that food parcel.
The best moments, I think, this time around in Somalia was going back to the camp in which we initially treated children and seeing happy, playful children.
They flew out on Saturday morning, eager to see their family and friends, but worried about the people
they'll leave behind.
Gift of the Givers says it will continue providing food to thousands in 4 camps around Mogadishu. They've seen the difference having just one meal a day can make. Valdi Karlse, SABC News, Mogadishu, Somalia.